Hey folks, welcome back to Doug Addiction. So this video is going to be a bit of a departure from some of the previous content I've had on my channel. And I plan to get back to that. There's been a few people requesting some updates on my progress with Cellcore and the protocol I've been following, my GI health and just general health. So I will get back to that shortly. So what I wanted to talk about today is something that's kind of been occupying most of my time and attention for the last little bit. Recently I underwent a complete psychoeducational assessment. And I found out that I have ADHD. Predominantly inattentive type, which makes sense because, as you can tell, I'm not a very hyperactive, impulsive type person. It came as a surprise, especially at my age, because I've obviously made it through school, university, and have a career. But there's still a lot of things that I really struggled with. And I was aware of my struggles. Like it's not like this is new issues that I struggle with or anything. It's just, I didn't know that they could be related to ADHD. How I actually first suspected that I had ADHD was from watching Stuart Anderson's YouTube channel. I actually was researching intermittent fasting just because it was something that interested me and something that I found of benefit, and I just kind of wanted to learn a little more about it. And it was interesting, he talked about how intermittent fasting helped his focus and attention, and he has ADHD, an attentive type, which I found really fascinating because I had noticed that when I was to fast and skip breakfast, that I was a lot more alert, way less sluggish, could think quicker. So yeah, I found that really interesting. So I decided to check out a bunch more of his videos just related to ADHD, and I came across this one, and I think it was something like signs that you have inattentive ADHD. And it was crazy because it was basically like he was describing me. I was aware of these issues that I struggled with, but I never related them to me having any kind of neurodiversity such as ADHD. So some of the things that are attributed to ADHD that I had no idea about were things such as being forgetful. And that's something I've always struggled with. It's kind of embarrassing at times, I lose things permanently. Like there's a few things I've lost around the house. My wife still gets after me. She has no idea what I did with them. I have no idea what I've done with these things. I'll go to my car, try and leave for work in the morning, and typically I'll come back inside a couple times because there's things I forgot. I've gone to work without my laptop and my glasses some days, so I have to come home and grab them. I'll put something in my pocket, and then half a minute later, I'll accidentally pat my leg or something. I'll be like, what the hell is in there? I'm like, oh shit, yeah, I just stuck my guitar tuner in my pocket like a few minutes ago and I've already forgot. Things like struggling with tasks that require any kind of mental effort, like things that are tedious. Especially as a kid, I really struggled to bring myself to do anything like that. And even as an adult, things like opening my mail or doing and understanding my finances, I really struggle with. And I just had no idea that was something that could be attributed to ADHD. Concentration, sensory issues, things like loud sounds or being easily distracted by sounds. And I've also actually had sensory issues with touch and with my clothing and that. It has to be really comfortable, or if it's a new piece of clothing I buy, I just won't end up wearing it. And there's, things like there's only one pair of socks, one kind of socks, I should say, one pair. I'm not walking around wearing one pair of socks for the rest of my life, but one type of socks, because it doesn't have any seams on the inside, because I would just find that so irritating that would just distract me during the day. And I think the big one that stuck out was anger issues. Because as a kid, I would have explosive anger. And it became less frequent into my adulthood. Like, probably, it'd still be around in my early 20s when the testosterone is flowing. I would, sometimes fly off the handle. But as a kid, and my parents remember this, my mom especially, I would have these fits of rage where I would literally destroy my room. And, and I was typically just, a happy, easygoing kid, but yeah, I would just, and I just couldn't control it. Until it came out and I got that physical aggression out, I really couldn't settle down, and I didn't understand that was part of ADHD at all. Oh, another thing I discovered is chronic lateness. Like, I am the guy, and it's not that I don't try, and it's not that I don't care, but it's almost impossible for me to be on time for anything. And I discovered that people with ADHD have something called time blindness, or they struggle with time horizons. And I actually noticed this, like, say if I know I have to be somewhere at like 9 o'clock and I have to leave at like 1:45. I'll glance at the clock, I'm doing things here or there, I'm not quite ready, but I'm like, oh, I still have a couple minutes, and it might be like 8:40, okay? So then that doesn't look like I'm gonna be late to me. It doesn't register to me that I'm gonna be late. But then 2 more minutes go by or 3 more minutes go by and I see, oh, it's like 8:43 and I have to leave in 2 minutes. Then it's like panic mode, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to be late. But I don't see it coming, it's really hard to explain unless you function like me. And it's kind of a running joke with my friends that I don't have that sense of urgency, and I am chronically late to events. I remember my friend tagged me in a post on Facebook. It was something like, quick, you're invited to a dinner party and you can only invite one guest. And if that guest arrives late, then you receive $1 million. And of course he nominated and tagged me because he knows I'll be late. And I couldn't even argue. I just laughed at it. I'm like, yeah, that's true. So after I discovered this video, I continued doing research. I kind of went through a plethora of articles, podcasts, on other YouTube channels, and I discovered so many adults that were just like me, that struggled with the same exact issues that I do. I discovered Jessica McCabe. She has a wonderful YouTube channel called How to ADHD. And as she puts it, I found my tribe. Like people that are just similar, like-minded, struggle with the same things as me. And if anything, it was just a really good feeling. Whether I eventually got the diagnosis of ADHD or not, just to see that I wasn't alone in my struggles. It's not that I'm dumb, or because that's how it felt sometimes. I was just dumb and I struggled with things that other people seemed to find easy, and I realized, well, maybe I have ADHD. Maybe that's why I struggle with these things. So I really wanted to investigate that further. So if anything, I've become, a little more gentle with myself, just giving myself a break sometimes, whereas if I'd forget something or screw something up, I'd be pretty hard on myself, You do that internal monologue where you're calling yourself stupid or lazy. It's quite a common thing for individuals with ADHD to have comorbidities such as anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, tic disorders, and often low self-esteem. And I am a person who has struggled with anxiety for most of my life, and obsessive compulsive disorder. So that I could definitely relate to. When I was growing up, there's definitely some signs, things that I struggled with. As I mentioned before, I definitely struggled with tasks that were mundane, like doing my schoolwork. I just couldn't bring myself to sit down and do it, or doing my homework. It was such a struggle. And I was so distracted and just wanted to talk to my friends who were next to me. Just couldn't engage with what was going on, what the teacher was saying. And I often found myself getting kicked out of class just because I was too busy talking to my friends, you know, and so I even missed out on more that way. But yeah, I was late learning to read. Math was always a struggle for me. You know, I was held back in school, and I always just felt different. I felt different from my peers. You know, maybe less mature, but also I just knew I was different and had trouble engaging with a lot of them. You know, some people I found were similar minded. You know, a lot of my closest friends I think are neurodivergent, whether they're undiagnosed ADHD or, you know, have had some difficulty with education. It's just kind of funny. Yeah, those tend to be the people that I can relate to most easy. I even remember on sporting trips, I used to play hockey as a kid, and we'd be on long trips on the bus, and I would, you know, instead of goofing around and interacting with my peers, I would often just sit and, you know, listen to music and just kind of be alone with my thoughts and just kind of get lost in them. I just found that easier and more appealing than interacting, for whatever reason that was. I just wasn't on the same page as them. So now as an adult, there's areas that I really noticed I struggle in. And I was quite aware of this, you know, for a number of years, but things like meetings at work, when there's a number of different speakers, sometimes the topics are shifting quickly. I'm trying to formulate what I would like to contribute to the meeting while listening to what they're saying. And this was a real struggle for me. And oftentimes I find I would come out of the meetings and I would have missed so much information that I remember talking to my coworkers and they'd be discussing something. I'd be like, oh, like, when did they say that? Like, I don't remember that at all. So I would totally miss those things. And I was quite aware that I was somewhat lost in these meetings, and I would always be shy to ask people to repeat things or ask for clarification during the meetings because it seemed like everyone else was picking everything up and I didn't want to slow down the pace of the meeting. And also, you know, once in a while I would get some kind of snide remarks, you know, like, oh, Doug's not paying attention or Doug's sleeping, you know, which hurt because I was actually trying to pay attention. I couldn't, I struggled. I wasn't absorbing what was being said. And the same kind of thing happens at dinner parties, or yeah, mostly dinner parties where, you know, a lot of people seated around a table, you know, it's kind of set up like a meeting. There's a lot of background noise, you know, if you're out at a restaurant or something. And I find it hard to focus, and I find my auditory comprehension goes way down when there's background noise. But there's, you know, a lot of different discussions going on, and I'm trying to take it all in, formulate what I want to say, but I don't want to be too far behind in the conversation. So I think there's a lot of anxiety that goes into that for me, so I tend to avoid situations like that. And I do find, you know, like socializing, say maybe at, you know, with a smaller group or at like a get-together at someone's house where you can kind of mingle and move between small groups, I find that easier for me. And obviously before I discuss time blindness, where I have all the best intentions of the world getting someplace early, but I usually end up getting there just in the nick of time if I'm not late. Yeah, so that's something I'm trying to work on, but it's hard. And I mentioned forgetfulness before. Names, I am introduced to people and I immediately forget what their name is. It's kind of embarrassing. Mental math is near impossible for me. For me to hold numbers in my head and manipulate them and solve problems, like I can't do it. As a kid, I always did things later in life, but I still kind of feel like that as an adult. Like I feel like I reached my milestones a little later than people. You know, I graduated college later, got married later, bought a house later. But you know, the interesting thing is they've done studies on the ADHD brain, and portions of it are like 3 years behind in development. And some parts just never catch up. You know, you finish developing, you know, I can't remember when your brain typically finishes, if it's like your mid-20s, late 20s. Yeah, but some parts just never catch up, such as your prefrontal cortex, which is involved in things like attention and planning and organization and goal-directed behavior. And I'm also easily distracted, especially at work. I find like anytime I'm in like a communal workspace, I really can't function. Like I can't get any reading done or like, write emails, write my reports. If there's chatter in the background, I can't drown it out. And I'll find that I'm reading the same paragraph or the same line over and over again, and I'm just not absorbing it. I'm also sensitive to auditory stimuli, like if I'm trying to sleep, I have to sleep with earplugs in, and even then I can still sometimes hear things through them, and it's a real struggle to just relax and drown them out and clear my mind. That's another thing. My mind is just always going. Like thoughts are just popping in whether I want them to or not. And I continue to struggle with organization, but I'm getting better with it. So all this being said, I strongly suspected that I had ADHD. So how I went about this is I ended up contacting a psychologist. I'd actually seen her before for some counseling around obsessive compulsive disorder and kind of settling down some of my obsessive thoughts and compulsions. But yeah, I reached out to her. I knew that she was someone who did psychological testing, and it's quite a process. Like you have to go for formal and informal interviews, fill out a bunch of different reading forms. She also had phone conversations with my wife, with my mom. I brought her a bunch of old report cards. Probably the most telling thing that she did, which I was nervous about it, but I was also anxious to see the results, was an intelligence assessment. An intelligence test looks at a bunch of different areas: your verbal abilities, your memory, things like spatial problem solving or something like that. I don't remember everything that I did, but what I did find out is that my working memory was significantly impaired. It was in like the 5th percentile. So I guess what that means is, like, if you were to look at a population of people, only 4% would be more impaired than I am. Or if you even simplify that, if you had 100 people in a room, only 4 people would be more impaired than me. So that's significant in my eyes. Like, I knew I struggled with my memory, but yeah, I didn't realize it was to that degree. Also, my executive functioning was, I think I scored like highly impaired. So for those of you who don't know, executive functioning is a number of different cognitive processes. Working memory is one that falls under that, but also things like organization, like goal-directed behavior, attention. Those are the things that come to mind right now anyhow. That was quite impaired. However, on the bright side, my language scores, as the psychiatrist who I later saw said, were through the roof. So I scored between the 91st to 95th percentile in my language scores. So, I think that's how I get by a lot. I do have some strengths, areas like language. And in my job, you really need to have strong language abilities. So that's probably why I've been successful in that area. So after that whole process, I was diagnosed with ADHD, inattentive type, and obsessive compulsive disorder, mild to moderate, which was no surprise. I knew I had obsessive compulsive disorder. I thought it'd be more like mild because I feel like it's fairly in check compared to how it was when I was a kid, but whatever. So the next steps there, I was referred to a psychiatrist by my GP. So I went to go see him, and we did an intake interview, I guess, and he reviewed my assessment report from my psychologist, and he was definitely on the same page. He's like, yes, completely agree with this diagnosis that you have ADHD. So what we're doing is we're gonna trial a medication. We're gonna try Concerta. So he's given me a prescription for that. I picked it up, so it'll be 2 weeks on a low dose and then go up to a higher dose once my body kind of gets used to it. So we'll see how that goes. I'm curious to try because I mean I've done some research on how ADHD meds actually work, because I guess the biggest deficit in the ADHD brain is the neurotransmitter dopamine. So we have trouble. It helps us regulate attention because it gets us engaged with what we're supposed to attend to. So when people with ADHD lack dopamine, they have trouble attending to anything because everything is registering at the same level. We can't regulate our attention to one thing. And if we do, sometimes we end up hyper-focusing on something that really interests us, and then nothing else gets in because we are getting major dopamine from whatever we're into at that moment. So that's really interesting. So stimulant meds like Concerta boost that dopamine, and then you're able to engage in those more mundane tasks that are less stimulating. So I'm really interested to see how it goes. I'm gonna make a follow-up video, or maybe videos documenting how that goes. Yeah, I'm gonna start that later this week and we'll see what happens. And really, if medication doesn't work, if it doesn't help, or the side effects are just too much for me, that's fine. I wanna give it a try. But I mean, really, I've made it this far. I've made it through university. I'm making it work in my career. I know where I struggle. I know where I need to put in extra time and plan, and I know kind of how to set up my environment for me to be most productive at work. And do I get distracted still? Yeah, I do. I get off task a lot. I'm less hard on myself for that, because I know I'm doing the best I can. And especially now, I know what I've been up against my whole life. It's really interesting when you think about it. I can understand why people can go their whole lives just not knowing that they may be neurodivergent, right? Because I mean, you only get one brain throughout your life, right? And you're just used to it. That's just how I function, right? So you don't understand how other people think and process information. People like myself might think they're stupid or dumb, or like, why can't I do things as easily as my coworkers? Why do I struggle with that? But now that I realize that my brain works different, and it's impaired in a few areas, I feel a lot better about myself. I feel like I've actually done a lot without having any accommodations. I managed to get a master's degree, and I did really well in university. I did realize that I needed to do things differently from a lot of other people. Like, I couldn't be in study groups. That wasn't how I learned. I needed to work at my own pace, work on my own, reread things, quiz myself, for things to really sink in, because I just knew that's how my memory worked. I do other things like sometimes I wouldn't attend class. In my undergrad, where they didn't monitor your attendance, or didn't, being in class wasn't part of your grade. If I came across a professor that, their teaching style didn't mesh with my learning style, I found that not attending class and just learning from my textbook and reading and studying on my own, that my marks would go way up. I'd just come in and write the exams and I'd get amazing grades. Like even right now, I managed to hold down a career that requires a high degree of organization and planning. I'm not as great at it as some of my coworkers, but like I said, I do the best I can. I do it my own way, and it's worked for me so far. So I'm really interested to see what's gonna happen when I start my meds. Like I said, if it doesn't work for me, I'm totally fine with that too. But I will make a follow-up video right away when I start the meds and kind of see what they do, probably starting with the first time I take them. Yeah, and I think that's about all I have to say about this for now. And I guess my advice for anyone watching this, you know, and they can relate to anything that I've said, you know, about, you know, areas I struggle with, I'd recommend talk to a psychologist. You know, a lot of the times they can just give you like a free phone consult, you know, and you can just talk to them about your options. And if anything, like, I think everyone should have a psychoeducational assessment. Like, it's a little scary, but I mean, it's so enlightening. Just, it might make you feel better about yourself. You know, if you find out you struggle in a number of areas, you know, like I have, I've managed to just be gentler, be easier on myself, you know, stop with the negative self-talk and appreciate my accomplishments. So there's a lot of good things about having ADHD. You know, people with ADHD tend to be very creative and think outside the box. And I think that would really describe me. In my high school yearbook, I was voted most likely to be the next Leonardo da Vinci. And I think it's because I was artistic and I was also creative and would just come up with really interesting and innovative ideas. I'm great with music, art. I'm a great problem solver. So yeah, I've just kind of learned to embrace and appreciate those positive aspects about myself. Anyhow, I think that'll wrap it up for today. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.